Mr. Stiver, whenever you're ready, and we know when we're streaming. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and I call to order this regular meeting of council for Tuesday, April 1st, 2025, and no, I'm not joking. We're going to start first with a land acknowledgement. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good morning, everybody. We are in the throes of a colonial-based federal election. It is important to listen to what is being said by the local candidates, as well as the leaders of each party. It is also important to pay attention to what isn't being said. The Trump administration has been threatening Canada and Canadian sovereignty, which rightfully has Canadians anxious and concerned. Someone coming to take your land and your rights would do that to anybody. Canadians are elbows up. Personally, I've met with each of the 3 local candidates here in the Yellowhead riding. I've witnessed which of them have given land acknowledgements and which haven't. Pay attention. While Trump and the economy have been taking center stage at the federal election, I'm concerned about what is getting very little attention, notably for me, truth and reconciliation and the environment. I get the immediate threats at our doorstep, but let's not forget about the other equally important issues. Let us keep in mind that while we may be distracted by bluster and bombast, right now there are commitments to treaty, truth and reconciliation, and the environment that we must, for all of our sakes, also keep focus on. I know there are a small number of folks that think Alberta should join the US. I would find it very fitting and ironic that if treaties that we signed were the great protector of Canadian sovereignty. Maybe we all know a little bit better what it might feel like to be invaded by a foreign people. With that, I acknowledge that we are in the town of Canmore, located within Treaty 7, region of southern Alberta. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge the Canmore area, known as Shooting at Willows, and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Ahari Nakota, comprised of the Bearspaw First Nation, Chiniki First Nation, Goodstoney First Nation, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Bakainai, Kainai. We acknowledge that this land is also home to the Rocky View Métis District 4 within the Battle River Territory. We acknowledge all nations who live, work, and play, and help us steward this land and honor and celebrate this territory. We commit to working in right relations to advance truth and reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now item A2, agenda. Any changes? Seeing none. I move approval of the agenda for April 1st, 2025 regular meeting of council as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now we have a delegation this morning from the Rotary Club of Canmore, the Trail Project Stage 2. Mr. Weiland.
Yes, good morning, Mayor Crosert and members of council. I'm here, it's actually my pleasure to introduce Carol Poland and Greg Birch, who are here on behalf of a volunteer delegation representing 6 community volunteers from the Rotary Club of Canmore, CAMBA, and the RMCC, which is the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club. They are here to talk to you about the Trail Stage 2, which is an initiative to develop a trail from Cochrane to Canmore.
Thank you, Mr. Weldon.
Yeah.
Ms. Poland, Mr. Birch, welcome to council. The microphone is yours.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Crosert and members of council, and also to members of the Canmore administration who are here and others who've joined us, both real and virtually, wherever the camera may be. It's indeed my opportunity. I'm thrilled and delighted to have this opportunity to come and speak with you today I, as a volunteer in the community, have been working on this project for the past 5 years, and that brings me to today, an opportunity to speak with you. And with Greg's assistant, he'll be my slide, please, forward next. And on that point, I'll say, slide, please. And another slide, please. So the trail. The trail is what I believe is it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, okay? Once in a lifetime for Albertans to connect, in the big scheme, Calgary to Canmore. And the trail has been broken into 2 stages, okay? Stage 1 is actively been worked on, the Calgary to Cochrane connection. I'm here with Greg and representing, as we said, a grassroots community volunteer-led, okay, that wants to drive the meetings forward of the stage 2 now. Canmore East is what we call it. Connecting communities, Canmore East. And what about the trail? The trail will be a multi-use pathway. It is intended to be accessible for all ages and all abilities. We envision that it would offer a range of opportunities for recreation, for tourism, and for commuting. It would encourage people to choose active transportation and to connect the communities and also promote reconciliation with our neighbors. Ultimately, also, the goal would be that the trail would eventually be part of the Trans-Canada Trail, which, as you know, is a large network across our country. And again, the emphasis is it would be accessible for all. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the trail. People ask, well, Carol, the trail. 2 stages. The active part is stage 1 has been worked on is Calgary to Cochrane. Stage 1 you can see in the blue line. That is connecting already, and the plan has been signed off on. What the plan will do is connect the Calgary Haskayne Legacy Park, Calgary's Matamata Greenway Trail, and it will link in with the Glenbow Ranch Provincial Park, and ultimately into the town of Cochrane. Then stage 2, if you'll notice, that's a broad paintbrush sweep, purposely done. We do not know where it's going. It's a broad sweep. And think right now, that's Canmore going east. Our delegation that we are speaking to you is, it's not for us to determine where specifically the Canmore East Trail goes. It'll be determined by the jurisdictional partners where that trail east goes. Next slide, please. So let's look at the potential jurisdictional partners that our group's identified going east. We've identified the town of Canmore. We've identified the next partner would be, we need Alberta Forestry and Parks, the MD of Bighorn. We need our Stoney Nakoda neighbors. We will need Alberta Transportation as a government piece of economic corridor. We will need the Rocky View County, and ultimately, potentially, back to the town of Cochrane. Those are the potentials for the jurisdictional partners. And going forward, next slide, what's the process then? We've identified who the potential partners would be, and if they agree to come to meetings, that is the question. And we were going to follow the same process of developing a plan that was very successful with stage 1, the Calgary to Cochrane stage. They used this process, they used this format. And what we propose in the center is, you'll see the largest bubble is what we call the Owners Council. That's your decision-making group. The decision makers, they agree to the concept, and as the trail plan takes shape, they eventually would have subcommittees coming off of the Owners Council. As you could foresee, there would be a funding committee, there would be communications committee, and alongside it, there would be a trail advisory group to the Owners Council. And the advisory group may and may not include people that have familiarity with building of trails, like CAMBA, like Trans-Canada Trail Net. They might also be groups that have familiarity with fundraising. That's an advisory group. And next slide, please. Alongside, you saw the small bubble off to the side of the Owners Council. We've titled that the core team. I represent one of the members of the core. We call ourselves the coordinators. We're just 6 grassroots volunteers who want to help champion and steer and lead this project ahead. We have no decision-making authority, but we would help coordinate meetings. As you can see, who are the 6 team members? My group that we put together approximately 2.5 years ago. And they have representatives from the Rotary Club of Canmore, of which I am one. We also have representatives from Rundle Mountain Cycling Club. We have representatives from CAMBA. And we have people like my colleague here who has experience with municipal planning. And Greg was also very instrumental in helping with the Legacy Trail. And it's that type of expertise that comes in on our volunteer team. Next slide, please. So let's go back to the Owners' Council. The Owners' Council really will be the decision makers. They will have the authority on the development and approval and the coordination of creating that plan. Where will the trail go? And they will work cooperatively with all other jurisdictional partners. They eventually will sign off on the final plan for the trail going east, and they will be the future owners and stewards and caretakers of the trail based on what has happened previously. Next slide, please. Off to the side, as was suggested, there may be a trail advisory group. Again, we model it from the success of stage 1. Again, it would support and provide resources to the Owners' Council. They would have no decision-making authority over the trail, but they would provide support and resources to that Owners' Council. As mentioned, they may have the trail planning and development experience. They may also have expertise working with all levels of government, because we will need to tap into municipal, provincial, and federal levels of government potentially on this trail. And then the question is, okay, Carol, well, where are we at now? So next slide. I'd like to share that stage 1, the current status is this has come from a concept driven by one gentleman, Alex Baum, a Rotarian and active cyclist and motivator, had a vision almost 10 years ago. And he has been leading both stage 1 and now handoff and supports us on stage 2. That stage 1, Calgary to Cochrane, has been very busy. In 2023, they signed off on the first memorandum of understanding of the jurisdictional partners in their group. And that was basically an agreement to collaborate on a plan for a trail. A very easy memorandum of understanding. And then this January, the second memorandum of understanding for stage 1 was completed and signed off by their jurisdictional partners. And that was an agreement to, again, collaborate on delivering the final trail plan. And it had a bit more meat in it. It had the details of decisions about long-term stewardship and ownership of that trail. And that all was memorandum number 2, signed off and completed. Now, how about the one that I speak to? Next slide, please. Stage 2, we call it Canmore East. We don't know exactly where it will go yet until the partners get together. So stage 2 is coordinating and getting meetings going to work east. We, as a team, came together approximately 2 years ago now, and we've received funding from Trans-Canada Trail. They gave us $10,000 to start to hold meetings and pull this together. And that funding was through the Rotary Club of Canmore, worked as the vessel to receive the funds. We then contracted a professional consulting team, which is called Urban Systems out of Calgary. And they're the professional consultants that have helped with stage 1. And we felt for continuity it would be good to continue to work with them. So where are we at now? Well, we are now meeting with jurisdictional partners.
Don't worry about that. I sense you're right near the end, so please continue.
Yeah, I'm about to wrap up. So we're here now meeting with jurisdictional partners that we've identified going east. And we currently have met with the MD of Bighorn, we have met with Alberta Parks, we have met with Transportation, and now we're before you. So it brings me to the final slide, which is the ask. And this is our ask that we take to each potential jurisdictional partner. And that is, are you interested in such a trail to connect communities? And if so, will you work together on a memorandum of understanding? And then finally, there will be a develop the trail plan. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you right now, and I'll turn to my colleague if I've missed any salient points. Yeah.
Just the final part of the ask, I think is up there, is to put this plan together, we'd be looking for a representative from the town, presumably an administrative person, to meet with the other partners to actually do the work of planning it. The core team would be there to assist and help and prompt and whatever, but you would ultimately be the key stakeholders. So we'd be looking for somebody perhaps once a month for a meeting just to keep the ball rolling. And sorry, I should also say, we gave to Riley copies of the two memorandums of understandings that were signed by City of Calgary, et cetera, on phase one that Carol was talking about. So that was, we can anticipate hopefully an agreement like this, if you want to come along. Thanks.
Thanks to you both for the presentation, and the Mr. Birch, the second to none slide advancement that you provided. Really appreciate you walking us through this project. And I can tell through the presentation, although this is a bigger section of the trail, I think it's going to bode well to have that earlier section and some sort of a pattern to follow. So that will help, I'm sure, with the stage 2. Just a couple of quick things. Is stage 1 funded yet?
So we, as Carol said, we received $10,000 to get going to put this together.
Yeah.
That was,
when
you asked stage 1
Yeah,
or
stage 1
2?
between Cochrane and Calgary.
asked
Sorry,
stage 1.
stage 1. So this is maybe you should answer the question. You understood it better.
Maybe, we'll tag team. If I heard you correctly, you wanted to know about stage 1
Yeah, I'm
funding?
just wondering if that's funded yet.
They are a capital funding project underway now,
Okay.
okay?
And are they
Capital
looking to the partners to do funding, or are they looking externally?
Interesting. In the memorandum they signed, they specifically wrote that no jurisdictional partner would be expected to put up the capital funding.
Okay, so that's obviously an important question as we
Yes.
evaluate
Yeah.
participation. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
They
then,
will fund it elsewhere, obviously, yeah.
right on. Councillor Faubert, you have a question.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you so much for your presentation. I'm curious if there's any projections on potential ridership, either for the stage 1 or stage 2, in terms of number of people it will bring here on bikes?
I've chosen Greg to
There hasn't been a projection as to what we might see. We're actually just, again, really starting. So even though we've thought about this, you know, if the town of Canmore says, no, we're not interested, we've got a problem.
Okay.
So we haven't really put that together. But as Carol said, I was part of the group that put together the whole process of the Legacy Trail. And at the very start, there was a meeting with the 3 councils, Banff, Canmore, and MD of Bighorn. And a couple of the councillors says, why are we interested in this? We don't care about a few people who want to ride their bikes to go to work in Banff or back and forth. We're not putting taxpayer money into that. So even if you do anticipate low ridership, that's not what happened on that trail. So I'd anticipate that as things get going, that there'll be more ridership. The interesting thing in the MOUs is that the City of Calgary, Rocky County, Town of Cochrane, all said, we are agreeing to both the stage 1 and the stage 2. So they're focusing on stage 1, but they've all signed on to the expectation that they're building this trail to Cochrane, or sorry, from Cochrane to Canmore as well, so.
Awesome. And then just one follow-up. What's your engagement plan for the rest of the jurisdictional stakeholders?
Okay, tag team. Our plan is, well, we've contacted the MD of Bighorn. Greg and my other colleague on the team met, and I'll let him speak to that final result. That was last month. We have reached out to our Stony Nakota neighbors, and I want to thank our mayor for providing me with the initial contact, and that is William Snow. And we have another contact with our Indigenous Stony Nakota through the town of Cochrane, because they've been, of course, reaching out, and we're waiting to hear back on that one. And if you want to speak to.
Yeah, so we did a similar presentation to the MD of Bighorn, and their council verbally is on site. They wanted to see the MOU before they kind of signed on the dotted line. Talked to Alberta Transportation and Economic Corridors. They aren't going to sign an MOU, but they said they will give us a letter saying that they are interested and will participate in a round of meetings, et cetera. They also, of course, said, but don't anticipate it's going in the highway right-of-way, which is expected.
That's what they said.
Meetings
last
being held with Rocky View, just at the staff level, and Cochrane's on board already. And then you said about the big piece in between is the First Nations lands.
And Alberta Parks?
Oh, yes, we've been meeting with Alberta Parks, and they're all on
Yes.
side.
Thank you.
Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks for coming down and doing a presentation. I think it's a really interesting idea. I think the Legacy Trail has become like a much-loved amenity between the two communities. I think stage 2 is a big lift just because of the various jurisdictional partners. I was curious, is this an all or nothing project for stage 2? For example, if we're able to like bridge further into the MD of Bighorn and then wait for later steps to maybe perhaps move through the Stony lands, is that a part of a vision at all? I'm just curious, is it all or nothing, or steadily grow it and then perhaps bridge it down the road?
It's an excellent question. We had that from the MD of Bighorn as well. I've gone back to a slide that was up earlier. At the bottom, it's hard to see up there, but we actually envisioned kind of 3 elements. There could be more or less, but the first is essentially from here, down to Canmore, out to, say, the bridge, Highway 1A, near Seabee. Could be shorter, could be longer, but something connecting in the Bow Valley, Bow Corridor area.
And could be either side of the river.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Or both,
Or both.
maybe a loop. We don't know yet.
Okay.
Then the second was through the Stony Nakota lands, and then that would take you to essentially the Ghost Reservoir, which is the boundary between the MD of Bighorn and County of Rocky View.
Rocky, yeah.
And then that stage. So it's a huge way. It's bigger than the stage 1 trail. So we thought, yes, we'd want to break it down.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm wondering if you have if it's not being funded by the partners and funded by somebody else, any elaboration on that somebody else?
So there's probably a couple of elements to the funding. One is the get going, this piece we're at right now. And so we've reached out to a few groups, and the Trans-Canada Trail Group has funded us a bit, but everybody said, including some private people have said, well, what's your buy-in? We're just, as Carol said, just 6 people trying to spearhead it and get it going. There's other group to the east, but they said, you know, like, who are you really? and do you have buy-in? So that's what we're trying to do now. So this MOU, if we're successful in getting it signed, we anticipate that will open up. Some people have said, we're interested in this, but like, where's everybody else, right? The real players, which are the team of people and municipalities that we're looking to approach.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
cross-jurisdictional side of this is very complicated, for sure.
It is. And maybe if I can add the extra part to it, Wade, excellent question. I might have alluded that none of the jurisdiction would put any money into it. Well, not quite, obviously. Cochrane's about to look at the plan they've signed off on with the city of Calgary will involve a bridge. We're talking a multi-million-dollar project now. So absolutely, their plan has taken many years to agree where the plan is, okay? Now they're in the capital funding of building that bridge. And they are seeking outside money and maybe the town's money. It's all in those memorandums of who pays for the bridge.
Sure. And
Okay.
one follow-up, if I may. Have you got an idea on a cost per kilometer from Calgary to Cochrane at this point in time?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Faubert, you have another question.
I thought of another question. Do you have a vision of this being a paved trail or not paved trail?
Well, again, I kind of always want to, and I appreciate the enthusiasm that's coming from the council for this. If I can back everybody, we're really the group to say, is there an interest?
Yeah.
Can we get the groups together? And it'll be the jurisdictional partners, that owners council will determine what it looks like, whether it'll be paved, and where it'll go, and what it'll cost.
So
We're not
then-
there yet.
So part of it is that working together, we would help create the vision as well.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry to get awkward at that answer.
Yeah, no, it's we like the enthusiasm, but really, it'll be the owners' council.
Yeah.
That jurisdictional partner is going to determine what that trail plan looks like. The vision is accessible by all,
Yeah.
multi-use.
It's an
My
exciting.
gut says it's
yeah.
going to be paid, but there might be gravel, right?
Definitely an exciting opportunity and an idea, and hence the questions that maybe get into details we're not in yet. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any other questions, so just a few things to finish up here. I'm glad that you reached out to Bill Snow. I actually saw him on Saturday, and I mentioned that you'd be in touch, so I
Great,
spoke to him
thank you.
about that as well. The MOUs obviously is an important piece. That's good information. The way that we handle asks from delegations is that we hear them on the one council meeting, and then we will return and make some sort of direction at the next council meeting. So we won't be deciding anything today. That will be May 6th. We'll do that. So that's an excellent opportunity for the MOUs to be circulated to council, so we have a sense of what those sorts of agreements look like. That will answer a lot of questions, I'm sure. And I just want to confirm that the ask right now is simply having participation of one person from administration to participate in the owners' council. And that's a meeting of approximately maybe once a month type thing.
That and signing of the MOU, so we have something in writing knowing that we have actually a jurisdictional partnership.
Right, right. So, but we're not being asked to sign an MOU yet, because that would obviously have to be created and then it would come back, right?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Excellent presentation. Very interesting project. Obviously, very little of it is within the town of Canmore municipal boundaries, but we're obviously a player at this sort of thing. The MD, Rocky View, and the Stoney Nakoda are obviously the big jurisdictions that we will be crossing, right? So it'll be good to have those folks at the table as well. Thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving to item D1, minutes of the March 4th, 2025 regular meeting of council. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I move approval of the minutes of March 4th, 2025 regular meeting of council as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And we also have minutes from March 11th. Any errors or omissions on that set of minutes? Seeing none, I move approval of the minutes of March 11th, 2025 special meeting of council as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now we'll move on to Mr. Carnes here with G1, Connect Downtown Planning, a Vibrant Town Center. It's been a long time coming.
Sure has.
Welcome to council and introducing the proposed ARP and land use bylaw amendment to us. The microphone is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Just a minute here to pull up the presentation. Okay. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Very excited to be here today. As Mayor Krausert mentioned, accumulation of a 18-month project led by staff from several departments at the town, tons of stakeholder engagement, input from the community at every step of the way, and this is bringing that area plan to fruition now and for first reading to council. So to start off, I'll just touch base on the recommendation before you today. So administration is recommending that council give first reading to the town center area redevelopment plan, which is the accumulation of the Connect Downtown planning process. Second, give first reading to a minor housekeeping amendment to the land use bylaw that just clarifies the town's authority around requiring development permits to be adhered to against a statutory plan like the ARP. And then finally, that the two bylaws be referred to first reading, to a public hearing on May 6th, next month. So a quick overview of the presentation today. I'll touch base quickly on how we got to this point, to first reading. I'll walk you through the highlights of the draft plan in each major topic area, wrapping up with a quick touch point on how this plan will work or be implemented and how change will happen, and then conclude with next steps and our recommendation again. So how we got here, what this journey has looked like. So to start off, quick refresher, what is an area redevelopment plan? Well, succinctly put, it's a long-range statutory plan that really charts out a vision for an area, a long-term, a future-looking vision, and then provides a set of supporting policies and guidelines to support the growth and change of that area over time. So why an ARP for downtown? I think it's important to be aware of the fact that change is inevitable and it is going to happen regardless. And without an area redevelopment plan, development will still occur. The question is, how do we, as a municipality, direct that change and guide it in a way that aligns with our ambitions and our vision for the area? So on the one hand, not having a plan, well, we don't really know what the destination is going to look like. It'll be rocky, there's gonna be bumps, potholes along the way. We'll get somewhere. We just don't know what it's going to look like. It's going to be quite inefficient, and we're probably going to have to make very reactive decisions along the way. On the other hand, when we do have a plan, we have a clear vision for what this destination is going to look like, how we will get there, and we can be very intentional, preemptive, coordinated about our steps on that journey. So the area redevelopment plan for the town center covers this general plan area, as you're probably quite familiar with at this point. So it's bounded by the Spur Line Trail to the north, Bow River to the west, 5th Street and 5th Avenue to the south, and then Railway Avenue on the east. So the policies of this plan apply to areas within that boundary, but of course it goes without saying that when we made this plan, we look at the broader network that extends beyond that, how we connect to the broader transportation network, the parks and open spaces network, and how those pieces fit together. And the town center area redevelopment plan, or what we call the Connect Downtown planning process, was an 18-month process that went through 4 phases of work. 3 of those were public facing. So the public facing phases started off with our vision phase. Our vision phase was broad. It was about engaging the community. It was about removing any feeling of constraints. It was about brainstorming, imagining the future of downtown. What could downtown look like? What could it mean to you? What would it feel like? And then also reflections on today. What's working? What isn't working? What would you change? The output of that phase was a vision document, providing a vision statement for the future of downtown, defining what our core values are for that future downtown, and then some transformative steps we could make in support of that broader vision. So with that vision in place, we moved into the options phase, which was taking the high-level vision and bringing to the community a whole swath of different options or choices we could make to achieve that future vision. It included things around our land use concept, the distribution of building heights, how the transportation network could look, what our parks and open spaces network could look. And we focused on deep engagement with interest holders in the community on those to understand what resonated with the community, what had good levels of support, and what do we want to move ahead with. Then we moved into the final draft plan phase, and that was where we took all that engagement we had done, the vision document, the feedback on the options, and we just did the technical exercise of actually drafting the document itself. So that process went from this past fall and is accumulating with council readings. So as I mentioned, engagement was a huge focus of this plan. So just some of the ways that we listened are kind of listed here to show you the magnitude of the engagement and the ways we went about it. It was hybrid, so it was a mix of in-person activities and online to make sure it was accessible and had broad participation, and included everything from engaging youth in these types of processes with classroom exercises, to some more conventional open houses, to our more conventional online engagement, but then really pivoting into something innovative called the warm-up concert series, which was held in 2 phases of work, both the options phase and the draft plan phase. And that was partnering with downtown businesses, hosting pop-up concert series to get people excited about downtown and imagine what it could look like. And that was anchored by an engagement hub at the Civic Center. And so just some photos here of what that looked like and sort of the scale of participation and input that we received through the process. And when we translate that into numbers, I think the numbers sort of speak for themselves. It set records for any type of planning exercise we've done at the town. We had to go through more than 4,600 pieces of input from a really broad cross-section of the community to help inform the development of this plan. And we also had input from 14 interest holder organizations representing everything from social services to affordable housing to transportation and to climate change and resiliency. And then finally, in the draft plan phase, we did what we are just calling a pulse check. We already did all the heavy engagement on all the key pieces of the plan in the summer in the options phase. So this was one final check-in with the community now that the document was drafted to say, here's what this document actually looks like when it's written in full. How do these core pieces resonate with you? And the intent of that was to help inform council decision-making when they consider this plan. So we had 622 respondents participate in the online portion of the engagement. That's excluding all the in-person engagement we did, like the warm-up event. 92% of those respondents were from residences, and we also had 54 downtown business owners or operators complete the survey as well. And what that pulse check showed us was generally the ARP aligns with the interests or ambitions of the community as a whole. So more respondents agreed than disagreed with things like the policy directions for each topic area of the plan, land use, transportation, parks and open spaces. They agreed as well with the statement that the ARP meets the needs of the community today and in the future, and that the ARP aligns with community values and aspirations. And with that said, despite that support, we did make a few changes following engagement based on some feedback. The key one was that we did remove any policy reference or direction around any changes to the free resident parking program. That was put in there for transparency, that as Canmore grows over time and parking is a finite resources, change might need to happen, and there's a few ways we might be able to do that. But it was suggestive, and it was just for transparency. It was not directive. Those decisions can be made in the future. So it was unnecessary to include in the ARP at this stage. It's not critical to the plan. So that was removed based on public feedback and concern about that. The second was more minor housekeeping edits to improve policy clarity, interpretation, and implementation of the plan. So that brings us to the highlights of the plan itself. And we'll start off with land use and urban design. So before we dive in, I think we should clarify that the approach to land use downtown acknowledges that there is something quite unique and significant about downtown. It is a place that residents cherish today. It is a place that visitors come to experience and see. And we acknowledge that that is important to the future success of the area as well. So rather than focus on any type of large-scale change, the plan really just focuses on making sure there's certain frameworks in place to allow the neighborhood to just naturally and organically evolve over time, over the next several decades, to be responsive to local needs in the community. So what that looks like is really reaffirming and limiting building heights in the plan area and limiting change. So most of the land use is limited to a maximum height of 3 stories, which I'll show you in a minute on a map. And the focus is really on form rather than on height or density. So it is about allowing just more equitable housing choices that are very compatible with a single family neighborhood. So focus on things like multiplexes that are very similar in scale and height. The other piece is it really focuses on prioritizing public views and connection to the mountains. So the building heights are limited in key corridors for that reason. There's also new policy direction around the design and the stepping back of buildings to create that sense of openness to the mountains and really embody that as part of the key character. It does implement new controls on visitor accommodation as well, restricting those to commercial areas and really tightening them up so that they're only going to be considered in limited circumstances in the broader public interest. And also focuses on integrating downtown much better with Riverside Park and the Bow River. So if we look at that spatially, what does that look like? Everything in yellow on this map is either residential or mixed use, and capping building heights at a maximum of 3 stories. The pockets in orange focused along Railway Avenue and what we call the Civic Corridor along 9th Street is where building heights would be permitted up to 4 stories. One key change you'll see here is the hatching mixed use area extends 1 block further west on Main Street. That is what we call the transition area, which I'll show you in a minute what that looks like, but that is to better integrate downtown to the Bow River, Riverside Park, and having this continuous corridor to those areas. But as I mentioned, the focus is on form, it's not on density or height. So if we look at this map, this just shows you what we generally anticipate for change. It's sometimes hard to imagine when you look outside and you might see a 1-story building. Imagine what is already permitted under existing zoning today, and this map clarifies that. So everything in black is generally where we are anticipating existing zoning to stay as is with no changes, leaving only certain pockets outside of that for gentle change. Estimated building heights, those would be determined through zoning amendments that come after council's approval of the plan, but we anticipate in the single family areas, for example, only a 0.5 meter increase in building height. So if you wanna stand here today, it's essentially 1/3 of you is what would be added into permitted heights. But what that allows us to do is at least allow more equitable housing choices like multiplexes. And where we do allow change, the focus is really on affordability. So the plan provides a lot of policy direction around prioritizing and ensuring town land is used for affordable, non-market housing. And similarly, on private property, incentivizing that through current incentive structures in our land use bylaw called density bonusing regulations. The plan restricts the areas that that actually applies to, though, to again go back to what I said about preserving views, preserving that connection to mountains and nature. So we could call this an affordable housing map that just shows where those policies apply. So all the dark red is town land, where we'd look to prioritize the delivery of affordable housing, so quite a significant portion of downtown. And then the light pink is the area where density bonusing would apply to. And that is already in effect today. We have density bonusing incentives in our land use bylaw. This scales back those areas slightly to ensure that we're not going to impact views or connection to the mountain in key corridors. So what that could look like, I'll quickly flip through each of the general areas. I think the key takeaway is it's a form, it's a character that you know well, and it's something that we have seen in Canmore. So the residential areas, this predominant 3-story building heights, very compatible with single family houses, but providing more diversity in housing choice and more attainable housing options. Then we move to the transition area, which is what I mentioned, that extra 1-block stretch west of Main Street, where we allow some small scale, really intimate, community-oriented commercial uses mixed with residential. So providing a little bit more of that continuous feel from Main Street to the Bow River and a gentle transition to the residential areas. Commercial core, very similar to today, maintaining the general 3-story height limits around Main and 10th Street, and with commercial uses on the ground floor and commercial or residential predominant uses above. And then finally, the gateway area, which is Railway Avenue, sort of the entrance, the sense of welcome into downtown, where we'd anticipate predominantly a 4-story building height with commercial uses on the ground floor as well. What that could look like in terms of urban design, the focus is really on supporting this contemporary mountain architecture that has started to emerge in pockets downtown and really reinforcing that, which relies on strong angles, clean lines, simplistic building forms, and really focusing on quality material choice and usually locally inspired or sourced materials. So we introduce a palette in the plan that you see on the right-hand side, where designers will take inspiration from the natural rocks in the landscape around here, so slate, charcoal, dolomite, limestone, incorporating those materials or colors into their developments, the lighter toned woods that dominate the area, spruce and pine, and then finally incorporating as accent pieces corten or weathered steel, and then also black powder coated steel to bring in a little bit of that mining and industrious history into the area and weaving that into this larger mountain character. And that would translate into the public realm as well. So use of natural materials, natural landscaping, and a really key focus on gentle, multi-layered lighting to really help define the space, as well as updating our signage and wayfinding in alignment with that character and identity as well, and introducing a hierarchy of that so people can easily navigate downtown, can easily use the trails and understand where they are and where they're going. So when we move into transportation and mobility and actually supporting change downtown, I think mode shift is really the key takeaway here. But it's important to acknowledge that mode shift is a focus about making sure the network works for cars, first and foremost. It is acknowledging that we need to make the network work for vehicles, whether that is commercial vehicles or whether that is private automobiles, but we have a fixed and finite road network. So in order to make sure the road works for cars, means we have to make sure anyone who can and wants to walk, cycle, or take transit has a way to do it and it's convenient and attractive enough so they do it, so that they aren't adding to the congestion on the streets. And so this plan, we did our updated transportation studies. It really reaffirmed the focus and the goals for mode shift in the integrated transportation plan, but also clarifies that that's only a 2030 document. And as we broaden our horizon and look forward, we'll have to exceed that mode shift target even more to make sure the space still works for cars. So we developed a transportation network based on that reality. So some of the key pieces here, which I'll walk through in a bit more detail for some of them, is pedestrianizing Main Street in red, right at the center of the plan area. But then moving beyond that, improvements to the general routing of the transportation network and the flow of it, signalization improvements as well, and then breaking up the blocks for permeability. So introducing mid-block connections downtown so you can be on 10th Street one moment, but have a quick, easy, and attractive connection to Main Street the next, and integrating those into a broader network of trails and multi-use pathways throughout the area. Another key piece is as well integrating a future expanded transit hub into redevelopment of town land across from the Civic Center so that we can support those mode shift goals and make downtown easier to access for a broader range of people. So I mentioned on the last slide, the plan proposes pedestrianizing Main Street. That, of course, would be subject to a future detailed design and planning exercise when that is a capital project. But this is a very unique sort of once-in-a-century opportunity where the underground utilities underneath Main Street will have to be replaced in the next 10 or so years, so that street will have to be redesigned regardless. But when we pedestrianize it, we have an opportunity to support the vibrancy of it year-round to make it a really effective and attractive place in the winter months and support driving people into those businesses in those months. And the pedestrianization also allows for benefits to the overall transportation network as well, reducing the need for a few signalized intersections and improving flow of the vehicles around it. And we bring a little bit of that experience into the lanes around downtown, so 9th Street and 9th Street West. We have what we call the Walk of Champions treatment, something that you see just outside of us here today, but proposing extending that throughout the entire downtown commercial area and the civic corridor. So having mixed-use developments on the one hand, activating that laneway and making it feel like a nice pedestrian space that people want to be at and go to the businesses for. Vehicles would still be accessible, of course. There could still be on-street parking as you see today, but it would be carrying that treatment throughout the entire expanse of it. And finally, I mentioned on the map, we want to break up downtown, make it more permeable, accessible, so introducing incentives for mid-block connections is a key piece so that Main Street and 10th Street can be more unified and an integrated whole. And making this area work means parking policies and directions to support it. And the parking policies and directions are all about ensuring parking is available for people who need it. That includes residents needing to park in front of their homes. It also includes people trying to access the downtown businesses. So there's several directions and policies in the ARP around parking, but the key ones are The plan identifies and proposes proceeding with an intercept parking facility. So that would be a large, likely multi-level structure that would provide a single one-stop destination for parking downtown, and identifies a preferred location for that as well. And it's a medium-term item, so it could likely happen within the next 10 years, but it is obviously subject to funding and further work. That would be complemented by an expansion of on-street and off-street parking regulations that would be implemented gradually over time on an as-needed basis to just maintain the directions of our integrated parking management plan, of where we always want to have parking spaces available, but making sure they're effectively utilized. So implementing tools over time as needed to maintain that target. Parks, open spaces, and recreation. So this is really key to the success of downtown and making it a place people want to live and want to visit. So the area redevelopment plan proposes a network of parks and open spaces, which includes improving ones that exist today, expanding Riverside Park, which I'll touch on more, and introducing new park space as well in a certain location off of Railway Avenue. So in terms of the higher level highlights first, the focus in the design of these spaces, their improvements, is really about retaining and improving them through natural functional elements. So again, this brings us back to that urban design piece of natural elements, a sense of place, connecting to the local area. So incorporating natural elements wherever possible, logs, boulders, things like that, that can be places of play and also rest, but in a way that fits the character of the area. Providing more critical infrastructure to support programming, events, activation, small-scale community pop-ups in these spaces, and improvements to support year-round use. So we move away from it being a summer-heavy place for residents and visitors and more of a year-round place, winter-friendly design elements and things of that nature. And probably one of the most key changes to the Parks and Open Spaces Network downtown is the creation of what we call a large central plaza. So we have a small portion of that outside the Civic Center today, but the idea is that extends across the street, continues on to what is currently the Arts Place site, and becomes a large-scale, community-oriented plaza that acts as the gathering place for the community. And that could support temporary closures of the street outside, so it is one large space to support everything from small-scale pop-up events, potentially things like farmers markets, or even larger-scale events like the World Cup ceremonies and things of that nature. The plan also proposes the need and the direction to expand Riverside Park to the adjacent town-owned parcel to the north, to not just meet growing demand in the future, but to also provide some fire smarting activities and to integrate with what I mentioned was the transition area. So you have this continuous connection from Main Street, you move into a more locally oriented shopping street, and then you arrive at a new expanded Riverside Park. So it becomes one continuous whole. New parks and open spaces are also identified in the plan rather than just plazas, and the notable one is the introduction of a new park off of Policeman's Creek, and the focus there would be amenities for a broad range of users, so a mix of passive recreation spaces to more active ones like a dog run and a multi-age playground as well. And we move into arts, culture, and heritage, which are really a bit of the fabric of downtown in the future. The focus that the plan proposes, though, is making sure that art downtown has a multi-purpose and an interactive function. So it's not just something that is pleasant to look at, but it's something that actually allows you to engage with the sense of place. Similarly, we can bring some of this public art intent into how we just design our more everyday items and our furniture, our furnishings. So there's some examples on the right there of what that looks like, but even simple fencing can have a bit of a public art function. Further, we want to expand the acknowledgement of Indigenous culture and histories downtown. So the plan commits us to a process of engaging on an Indigenous art and place naming exercise for our park and open spaces. And when it comes to more of the urban or built form considerations, the plan looked into our historical resources downtown and doesn't propose any changes there. So it is about reaffirming those protections for them and integrating them into the urban fabric. But when it comes to new developments, supporting murals on blank walls, but also requiring new developments on Main and 10th Street, to have construction fencing that has a public art function, as you can see in that image there, so that when construction happens, it's not as disruptive to the business community or to residents on those streets. And then finally, in terms of policy for future land use change, it really supporting the expansion or the creation of a broad range of arts and culture uses, whether that's live-work studios or supporting the expansion of existing facilities so that those can grow over time and meet the needs of the community. And finally, we'll close with environment, climate change, and resilience. So downtown, as you know, is nestled between Policeman Creek and Bow River, critical water resources for the area. And the plan proposes new water body policies, including an expansion to how far buildings have to be set back from those water bodies, or requiring things like easements to ensure the long-term health of those setback areas can be maintained. Reducing wildfire risk, of course, is what we saw in Jasper, has been a key focus of this plan. So committing new developments to implement best practices for Fire Smart and do wildfire resilient landscaping on those sites as well. And then finally, wherever possible downtown, we want to manage stormwater in a way that has co-benefits and creates a sense of place as well. So using low impact development or green infrastructure tools wherever possible. So those would be bioretention facilities and bioswales and rain gardens where we have space, and where we don't, things like soil cells underneath the surface to support larger and more mature trees. And as we look forward, it's important to also future-proof buildings so we aren't forcing them to do costly retrofits in the future or having to incentivize those. So the plan does that through a few different ways, but key ones are requiring all new development to have pre-wiring for electric vehicle charging, and then also suggesting updates to the town's current density bonusing incentive to support energy-efficient buildings as an optional pathway. Similarly, we want to improve emergency preparedness, so looking into the potential to incorporate resilient community spaces into redevelopment on town land so that there's a place people can go to during extreme weather events, whether that is wildfire smoke, probably being the most notable one. And then figuring out as well how we coexist with wildlife. So policy directions around reinforcing or protecting our natural areas. It's also related to the water body setbacks I mentioned. And then also implementing measures to limit grazing habitat and limit those conflicts between users. So that was a high-level overview of all the policy pieces, but if we want to just take that away and say, okay, well, what does that look like when we pull it all together? It looks something like this. And I think the most striking thing here is it's probably an area that resonates already. It's a very similar character, feel to what you know and what exists today, but introduces some gentle change to really just enhance the vibrancy and functionality of the area long-term. So the expansion of Riverside Park to the north, as I mentioned, you can see there, integrating into that new transition area, and then a pedestrianized Main Street that is more vibrant and active in all months of the year. So how the plan will work or how it will be implemented, it's really going to guide really incremental change over the coming decades in two key ways. So policies on development, and then guidance or direction on town actions, steps that we have to take as a municipality. So on the policies for development side, the ARP introduces policies that will guide decisions around redevelopment, around the design of buildings, around the form, around the character. But it's important to remember that there's a few things here that the ARP doesn't change. So development will happen gradually over time. This doesn't trigger whole-scale redevelopment, especially when the plan focuses really on largely reaffirming densities or building heights that already exist today. Second is development will still be the result of decisions or actions by property owners. So anyone who owns their property is not forced to sell or forced to redevelop. It can stay as is, it's up to them and it's their decision. And then finally, related to that is the plan doesn't force development to happen, it just regulates what it looks like when it does happen. The ARP also provides guidance for town actions, decision-making, making sure that this doesn't just remain a plan, but it is actually something that comes to fruition and something that we can see. So it does that through a few ways, and the most notable is policy references in the plan, but then also an implementation framework at the back of the plan. And that implementation framework sets out a set of activities and steps the town needs to take over the life of this plan to realize it, estimated order of magnitude cost estimates, identifies who's responsible for those activities, and approximate time horizons for when they might occur. But with that said, of course, if you look at the implementation framework, the key takeaway is investments and improvements are always opportunistic, of course. It's based on available funding. It's based on other things that are occurring that present that opportunity, like the underground utilities needing to be replaced on Main Street, as I mentioned. And it's subject to funding and capital budgeting processes. So with that said, some of the priority implementation actions that we would commence immediately following council approval of the plan is developing a strategy to equitably finance growth. So looking at the variety of tools that we have the authority to implement to make sure these improvements are something that can be achieved and financed adequately. Conducting updated financial testing, so just looking into the economics of development and using that to inform updates to the town's density bonusing regulations and the land use bylaw. And finally, we would begin preparing our amendments to our regulatory documents, so they are in alignment with this plan. So preparing amendments to the land use bylaw is the key example, and bringing those forward to council in the future. So we'll close on next steps. First reading is, of course, today. We're recommending public hearings, second and third readings on May 6th. And should council approve the ARP, then implementation would begin in accordance with the implementation framework in the back of the plan. But it is a 25-year time horizon just for things within our control. Redevelopment would likely take far beyond that time horizon as well before properties are redeveloped fully. So the recommendation, as I mentioned at the start, is giving first reading to the ARP today, giving first reading to the minor housekeeping amendment, just clarifying our authority around development permits being tied to alignment with statutory plans, and then scheduling a single public hearing for May 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cairns. Really appreciate you being here and giving such a wonderful presentation, very comprehensive, and I know that there's a whole team behind it as well. And so I thank for all the work that has gotten us here today. Just a clarification on the one of the last points you made about second and third readings. Should we have first reading today and then a public hearing May 6th, given that there may be a considerable feedback on May 6th, it's very likely that I'll be proposing, if it is scheduled for May 6th, to be postponing it to the next council meeting. That said, in agenda review, I'll actually be bringing it up, then we may just schedule it for June in any event to give us time to reflect on the feedback that we get. So, but that's just a timing thing. Opening it up to council to see if there are any questions at this point. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Cairns, for all your hard work. I can see the vision in this, and I think that I'm very excited to hear from the community as well. My question is around big idea number 6, create accessible and adaptable spaces. Can you maybe give help me understand how the plan includes that big idea? I think you covered all the other 10, but that was one I wanted to hear about more. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Faubert. So the plan, I can just say early on in the first few chapters, there is a summary of all the 10 big ideas, and it lists all the policies, or the key policies, I should say, in alignment with each big idea. But at a high level, the accessible and adaptable space is sort of multifaceted, of course. On the one hand, it's about accessibility and accessible spaces broadly. So directions around the design of having things like ground-oriented units, direction around the choice of materials to support accessibility, and we'd also include that in our parking as well, so accessible parking spaces being the priority near commercial businesses. So those are some of the key focuses more broadly, but when it comes to the individual spaces, a lot of the focus is on adaptable or multi-purpose amenities or infrastructure in our public open spaces. So making sure they're accessible to a broader range of users, making sure they're functional and accessible in the winter and not just the summer. Even on our commercial core as well, even down to things like certain standards for awnings or weather protection to make sure the sidewalks are clear, functional, and can be used by people in all times of year. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions? Councillor Ma.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Cairns. Like 18 months is a long time to do a project, and so thank you for this. I was curious in your opinion, I was really heartened to see as I was going through the initial draft of the document, there is a section that talks about the views on Main Street. Because a lot of ways for us as a tourist town, I do feel preserving our viewpoint off of Main Street, especially towards direction towards Three Sisters, is kind of a critical piece. I've heard a lot from locals, et cetera, about, this is what we're here for. In your view, do you feel this new plan gives, is a little more prescriptive and a little more defined on how we can protect views and form as opposed to what we currently have as our existing plan? Because I think people are trying to understand that piece.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Moll. Yeah, it's a good question. So yes, I think there's a few ways we can look at that. We can look at it sort of the macro scale where the distribution of our land uses and maximum building heights are done in a way so that views can be preserved first and foremost. So today, for example, the density bonusing regulations that we have in the town's land use bylaw apply to all of downtown.
Mm-hmm.
We propose in the ARP scaling that back, and we identify the areas it would apply to, and it is about preserving those views for that reason, so that we're not incentivizing a taller building on Main Street or on a key public open space corridor.
Okay.
Then when we zoom in a little bit, on Main Street, on 10th Street, the plan reaffirms the existing building heights limits, proposing no increases there. We assessed different scenarios and looked at sort of the architectural design and what could be accommodated, and we felt any changes to that would start to impede those views. But then we wanted to take an approach as well where we're focusing on views and connection to the mountains and a sense of openness broadly, rather than trying to single out one specific view from a very specific corner and just saying, hey, this one's important, we should protect it. So there's some policy guidance in the plan to achieve that effect. So corner sites, for example, near our commercial areas, having to provide additional step backs on the corners, or they could propose, just for flexibility because some sites might be unreasonably constrained, an alternative that we deem satisfactory. But that goes beyond what is required today, and it is for that intent. It's try to preserve those views more broadly.
Okay, yeah, so because I was definitely heartened to see that on Main Street itself, the density bonusing is not really an option that's available. And yeah, it's I think part of why this is a bit of a hot topic, I've just heard from a lot of people, there's a current project that's being built on Main Street that it kind of goes quite opposite to what is being described in here. And so I think there's a lot of motivation to make sure that doesn't happen again. And so thank you for this project, and this great document is huge. And I'm really, really looking forward to hear what the public has to say, because we need your feedback as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Mayor Crosert. Thank you, Mr. Cairns, for joining us here today. I'm not really sure how many questions are really pertinent for today, but some of the concerns I'm hearing are certainly around parking and our downtown parking lots. And the idea of an intercept parking lot down by the Elevation Place. And I wonder if you could just speak to more of what this document says to the future of those parking lots.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Graham. And that's absolutely something we heard through engagement at all phases. I think if we look back to the options phase as well, one of the more contentious pieces was around how do we manage parking. So I think it's important to acknowledge from the start, like parking is a finite resource, and as travel demand grows, largely irrelevant to this plan, because this plan is about allowing more housing choices in the downtown area itself, where people can walk to Main Street if they live 2 blocks away. It's largely driven by the parking demand that is generated from outside the downtown area. And as those travel demands increase, we obviously have to make changes over time to keep those parking spaces available. The intercept parking, as you mentioned, is one of the key elements that can really help deal with sort of multiple challenges that we face around parking accessibility, but also impacts on the street network and congestion. So by moving the intercept parking facility to the preferred location near Elevation Place, we can stop those vehicles from having to even enter the downtown street network, improve vehicle flow as a result, and have sort of a one-stop shop for parking. So the ARP provides the framework for that. It identifies the preferred location, possible timelines, and we would commence on that exercise, but that of course is a massive capital project that has to be pursued separately from just an ARP, a long-range plan. In terms of the town lands, that is the surface parking lots downtown today, While those are of course identified for higher value uses that provide a public benefit, it does not mean parking can't be provided on those sites in the future. And to that effect, there's policy direction in the plan that signals that the town is going to assess the need at time of redevelopment of those sites to consider the necessity to incorporate on-site parking. So that could be in structured parking, it could be one level, it could be multi-level on one of the sites, it might be scaled back from what it is today. It's all going to be based on how demand evolves over time. And at the end of the day, it's all about making this network work for everyone, and those interests would be incorporated into that exercise.
Thank you very much for that fulsome answer. I appreciate it.
Put very briefly, there won't be development of those lots unless we have a plan that accommodates for parking appropriately. Okay. All right, looking to see if there are any other questions. I don't see any. Once again, thank you.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the presentation. It was excellent. So I'll now move the council give first reading to Town Center Area Redevelopment Plan, Bylaw 2025-05. Maybe would like to speak to the motion. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to speak to this one. If council should give direction to proceed to first reading, that's really, in my mind, us really wanting to get to the public hearing and wanting to hear from the public about what they think of this project. At this point in time, it's not really an endorsement of the documents, but a desire to get there. So that is why I will be voting in support of this today.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm of the same view. I like a lot of what I see here, but I want to hear from the public as to what they think and where the, hot spots, if any, are that we need to consider, and then respond to accordingly after the public hearing. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to vote to bring this to a public hearing. For sure, as echoed by many of the people on the dais here, we do want to hear what the public has to say. And so that public hearing, May 6th, please, communicate with us prior. Make sure you come to the hearing, and let your thoughts be known, whether it's in writing or in person. Just because one does not participate in the engagement process doesn't mean engagement did not happen. You have to be there and present what it is that matters to you. I think this plan is a great start. I do think there's spots where you can tune it up, and if I can have some public guidance, I would appreciate that. So thank you.
Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you. I will also give support for first reading so we can get to the public hearing. I think it's important for everyone to carefully read through this document, sit with it, look at the areas that you might not like, look at the areas that you do like, and bring that to our attention. One area that I think a lot of people should take some time to read is the implementation table in section 10. Just because, again, this isn't going to happen overnight. This is 25 plus year plan. Change is already happening now, and as has been stated multiple times, if we don't direct the change is still going to happen, and you might not like that change either. So this is the best way for us to have a clear path forward and get the change that we want. But again, I know there's certain issues that people have brought to my attention, that some of those issues are in the medium term, which are 5 to 10 years from now. So they're acting as if once this is if this goes through, that instantly those issues will come to light, and a lot of those things are quite the horizon still. So I would hope that people will take some time to read this and really focus on what things they want changed and how they want them changed, and to come to the public hearing and let us know.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to build on that, I really believe it's important for anybody that's coming to provide feedback to read the whole document extensively. There's so much information in there. For example, you might be reading through the residential section and you're thinking, well, what about Fire Smart? Well, there's a Fire Smart section. Or what about traffic? And there's a traffic section. And they'll look at a map and say, well, there's housing plan for the parking lot. We're going to lose all our allotted parking. Well, no, if you read the the details, it says that any change in the parking, there will be first a plan put in place before that's done. So it's really important to read it as a whole. It is a very comprehensive document. Anyone else wishing to speak to first reading? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will now move, Mr. Kearns, you didn't speak much to the revised land use bylaw amendment. I was wondering if you wanted to just say a few words before I put the motion on the table. It's very much a transitory type motion to allow this to have some impact before things are changed, but you will say it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, Mayor Crossert. I agree with what you had just said, and I think that's why we didn't give that too much airtime in the presentation. It's largely viewed as a housekeeping amendment, clarifying the town's authority around being able to require all developments to be brought into alignment with a statutory plan, not just provisions in the land use bylaw.
Great, thank you. And before you sit down then, just want to check if anybody has any questions before I put that motion on the table. Okay, thank you very much. I'll now move that council give first reading to revised land use bylaw amendment 2025-13, changes to variance powers. Anybody wishing to speak to that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And I'll move that council schedule a single public hearing for bylaws 2025-05 and 2025-13 for May 6th, 2025. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councillor Graham.
Just a question of procedure on that public hearing. Will participants get 5 or 10 minutes to present, being that it's 2 bylaws at that point in time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, thank you.
Just for the sake of going through, this second bylaw is very much housekeeping, so it'll just be 5 minutes total. Okay. Anyone else? I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And we will now take a break until 10:30. right. So let me know, we're streaming? All right, we're back. And we're moving on to item G2, Silvertip Block 9 Residential Development. And let me just pull it up here. All right, Ms. Collette, welcome to council. The microphone is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you for your time this morning. I'm here to present first reading of Bylaws 2024-20, 2024-39, and 2024-40, which are amendments regarding the Silvertip Block 9 residential development. So the subject property is kind of shown in both of those maps there. It's on the corner of Silvertip Road and Mountain Tranquility Gate. And the subject of these amendments really speak to both of the sites, but particularly the orange portion in the first visual there, which is a portion of that lot and is part of, or was part of, the golf course district. So in July 2024, administration received an application for a land use bylaw amendment subject to this property. And really the amendment sought twofold. The first was a a change in district for the subject property from the golf course district to the STR2 Silvertip Comprehensive Residential District. And then the second piece of that application was to amend the maximum height provision in the STR2 Silvertip Comprehensive Residential District. So really the three amendments or the three bylaws speak to three different documents, the first being the land use bylaw. And we can categorize the amendments kind of into two bunches here, map amendments and then text amendments to the land use bylaw. So through the actual review of the application during the map amendment piece of the land use bylaw, we determined that we would also need map amendments to the Silvertip Area Structure Plan and the Municipal Development Plan. So there's the map amendment piece, and then there's the text amendment piece, and for reference, it's just the text piece is shown below, but we'll go into that in more detail. So the map amendments, there was a recent lot consolidation that occurred between the blue portion and kind of the orangish-brown portion that took these two previously separate lots and put them into one. And at the time, or currently, the blue portion is in the STR2 district, the Silvertip Residential District, and the orange bit is in the Golf Course Direct Control District. And so there was a need to make those two districts kind of speak to each other and consolidate it into the STR2 district. And that's really the essence of the map amendment piece. So during the review, we determined that we'd also need amendments to the Silvertip Area Structure Plan, just to kind of bring that piece from the golf course area, the open space designation in map 7 to the residential kind of orange blob. The blob's not entirely clear. Area structure plans tend to be a little bit more high level and not get right down to the details of the lots and plans. And then the other piece is the Municipal Development Plan, which is taking it from that orange blob, that little piece, and putting it into, I'm saying blob lot, the residential piece. Now the text amendments to the land use bylaw are to the STR2 Silvertip Comprehensive Residential District. So while the map amendments really speak specifically to the site, the STR2 text amendment speaks to the entire STR2 residential district. And really there's the two elements there. One is the increased height, which would really result in more or less a change in buildings from maximum of 3 stories to approximately 5 stories. And you can see the difference in 12 meters in height to 22.32 meters with a minimum of a 512 slope. And really the not exceeding 9.5 meters with the previous max of 12 meters was to get you the kind of characteristic Canmore steeper slope of roof. The 512 achieves the same thing. So it's very consistent with the urban design guidelines. It's just another way of saying the same kind of roof slope with a higher building. And then there's the other element at the bottom that speaks to it, including 1.2 meters below for basements and underground parking structures, and that's just really to provide extra clarity. So really the intent of the amendment was to allow for more efficient building design. We'll talk a little bit about it later and some of the concerns that came up during the circulation. But this site in particular has some pretty steep grade changes, which makes it very difficult to develop on the entire site. So the increase in building height allows you to be more efficient with your building design. So you're not going out, you're going up. So it also provides an opportunity to have a variety of dwelling unit sizes. And it also provides, with the additional height, to more have underground parking as opposed to surface level parking, which of course provides an ecological function, retains vegetation on site. So as I mentioned earlier, the text amendment with the height applies to the entire STR2 district and not just the subject site of the map. And for reference, the only place that the STR2 district exists is our subject area and then right across the street, which is actually at a lower elevation than the subject area. The applicant held a public information session on Wednesday, December 18th, and had approximately 30 to 35 attendees. They had some design boards and a live 3D model to show sight lines to the residents and those who were attending. We also completed a mail-out circulation to landowners within 60 meters of the site, and a notice of application was posted on the property. We did receive quite a bit of feedback from residents. And there was really four key concerns that kind of came up, some themes. Parking requirements and the impact to parking, sight lines to existing residential development in the area, residential density and population elements, and then wildlife corridors and what impact this development would have on those. So the first one I'll really address is the residential density piece. The Silvertip area structure plan does, for this lot 9 or block 9 area, limit the number of residential units. So even adding more space to it, which would be the lot consolidation piece, or the building height, wouldn't change the density in terms of residential units. Regardless, we're stuck in that area with between 210 and 285 units. So really, residential density in terms of dwelling units per dwelling unit numbers isn't changing. So in that regard, there's no difference. Pardon me. The sightlines is also an interesting thing to look at and kind of hard to do on a flat surface. This is a very convoluted contour map, which in my days of planning school gave me a headache. So I will do my best to try to add some assistance. In the upper right-hand corner there is where the Silvertip residences are. And those lines, each line is a meter above sea level. And as the lines change, so too does the elevation. So when you see lines really close together, that's a steep change, a very significant change. And then the larger the distance between the lines, it starts to flatten out. So what you can see here, if you really use your imagination, is up on the top right corner, existing dwellings are kind of up on a hill, and then the lot itself, the subject lot, really drops down and levels off on the far left there. So there is a pretty significant difference in the subject property itself, 1435 to 1445 meters above sea level. That is actually a pretty considerable grade change within one site. And the flatter area, which is where the majority of the development would occur, would be around 1435 meters above sea level. On Silvertip Point, which is where the houses are, kind of towards the back end, you range in elevation between 1460 and 1465 meters. So you wouldn't have somebody building on the tip top of that subject property at 1445, but you could kind of see and get an idea of what that elevation change is, which is around, if you take the highest point of the subject site and the lowest point of Silvertip Point, that would be about 15 meters. And then about 25 meters would be the farthest away that you would be from the lowest point to the highest point on Silvertip. So it is a pretty considerable grade change, and that is at ground level. So if somebody was in their house on Silvertip Point, they would be their height plus whatever their floor elevation is.
So just to clarify on that while you're right there, if you put a 20-meter building at the highest point of the subject property, which, as you indicated, you won't be able to do that. It's going to be lower than that. But even if it was, they would go up to 1465. So then it's going to either reach the base of the elevation or 5 meters above the base of the elevation of the higher elevation properties.
Correct.
So what you're saying is that you get one, and then you got another one. So what they're doing up here, they're gonna be able to see over top of what's down
Yes.
below because of the elevation change.
Absolutely. And not to mention that from the subject property to the rear of those property lines to their back lot line, that's about 140 meters. So it's quite a considerable distance. It's not like you're abutting,
Right.
and then looking across, you're here and they're here. If
Right.
that makes any sense, those terrible
Yeah,
acting out.
yeah.
Another concern was the wildlife corridor and the role, especially in the winter time, that the golf course plays as an informal wildlife corridor. Unfortunately, we are limited in terms of what plans we can reference in terms of what established wildlife corridors are. So the closest wildlife corridor is to the southwest, and that's about 150 meters as well. So there's no formalized wildlife corridors that are really in proximity to this site. We kind of went through this already, but from the change in elevation between the subject property and even the other STR2 parcel, which is lower than their subject site, and the elevation of surrounding existing residences, administration was satisfied that sightlines would be maintained. The removal of the eave-line height, we talked about it again, it meets the intent of the urban design guidelines while just making sure that it's actually, you're able to construct it. And it's not, the subject site and the STR2 district really aren't adjacent or directly abutting any existing residential development. So there's not really a significant impact in that way at all. We therefore recommend that council give first reading to the Municipal Development Plan Bylaw Amendment 2024-39, first reading to Silvertip Area Structure Plan Bylaw Amendment 2024-40, and first reading to revised land use bylaw development bylaw amendment 2024-20, and that we schedule a public hearing for those bylaws on May 6th, 2025. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation. I especially appreciated dealing with the concerns that were raised and putting that in context for us. Looking to council to see if there are any questions. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Ms. Collette, for the great presentation. Yeah, that topo map of the contours, that's a tough one to really get a fulsome understanding of it relative. I know the proponent said they had a 3D model at some point. Would we be able to get access to that model prior to now or before the public hearing?
Prior to the public hearing?
Or like at the public hearing, or if they're
Yeah,
presenting? I just want to get a better idea of what's going on, just the topography, the
Sure.
lines and everything.
Miss Coop, the applicant's planner from B&A Planning Group in Calgary, she is in the room today, but yes, they can provide the 3D model at the public
Okay.
hearing.
All right, great, thank you. So like, I think you helped me quite a bit there. So it sounds like the existing homeowners, they're on a 1460 to a 1465 elevation. And then you got about a 140 meter run to where this site is here. And then this property site goes from 1445 down to 1435. And we're looking for potentially a 22 meter 22.32 meter, and is that kind of, could I expect that height, that 22 meter height, will be more at the bottom of the slope where it's coming up, kind of taking advantage of the dropping slope, or is that, because I haven't seen the design, obviously we're at this point of ASP, I'm just trying to understand like what it is that I'm contemplating here. Yeah.
Through the chair, thank you, that's an excellent question. Yes, you're right, the majority of the grade change actually happens at the back of the site where it's a pretty significant drop down, and then the site at the front, closer to the corner, levels out. So that's where you would see actually the building footprint, and then 22 meters taken from the 1435, as opposed to on top of the hill. So that grade change happens in a very short distance, short range.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, it looks to me on that contour map that there's two areas that are more conducive where the contour lines are further apart, where you can do some building. You're not gonna build on a drop, right? Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. So I'll move that council give first reading to Municipal Development Plan Bylaw Amendment 2024-39, Silvertip Block 9 Residential Development. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councillor Graham?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a similar statement to what I made for the Connect Downtown. This is my desire to get to a public hearing and hear from the public. In no way, shape, or form is this a endorsement of the document at this point in time, but I do want to hear from the public.
Speaking in favor of the plan, I also want to hear from the public. That said, I also recognize that the changes being proposed are relatively small and with very little impact based on what we've provided, but I'd like to have that confirmed through hearing what the public has to say. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move that council give first reading to Silvertip Area Structure Plan Bylaw Amendment 2024-40, Block 9 Residential Development. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move that council give first reading to revised Land Use Development Bylaw Amendment 2024-20. Is that actually correct, the Land Use Development Bylaw? Shouldn't it just be Land Use Bylaw Amendment? Yeah, okay, so I'm going to actually, that's an editorial thing that we'll see through to the next one. So this is, the council give first reading to the revised Land Use Bylaw Amendment 2024-20 Silvertip Block 9 Residential Development. Anybody like to speak to that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And I'll move the council schedule a single public hearing for bylaws 2024-39, 2024-40, and 2024-20 for May 6, 2025. And we'd like to speak to that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the 2025 Borrowing Bylaws. Item G3. Mr. Irwin, welcome to council, and whenever you're ready, the microphone is yours.
Just going to get our presentation. Ms. Gibbons has a sick child this morning, so thrown in last minute. There we go. Good morning, Mayor and Council. As part of the 2025 2025 budget, Council approved 3 capital projects that included debt financing as one of the sources of funding. I'm here to present second and third readings of today's borrowing bylaws. And the recommendation is as follows, that Council give second and third readings to borrowing bylaws 25-10 for the fire services ladder truck replacement, bylaw 2025-11 for snow management facility, and 25-12 for water treatment plant 1 chlorine glass upgrade. As a reminder, borrowing bylaw 25-10 is for the ladder truck replacement and is for 1.5 million in debentures. And borrowing bylaw 2511 is for the snow management facility for another debenture of 1.5 million. And borrowing bylaw 2512 is for water treatment plant 1, chlorine gas upgrade for 900,000 in debentures. Again, as illustrated here, these borrowings will remain, our internal debt limit will be below, with these borrowings, we will remain below our internal debt limit. The 15-year Alberta Treasury Board interest rate as of yesterday was 4.56%, which has dropped slightly from when the RFD was presented earlier, but it'll all depend on when the debentures are taken, and some might be a year or even 2 years away, so, of the interest rate. No petitions were received during the petition period and first reading. So in conclusion, the recommendation is as follows. The council gives second and third readings to borrowing bylaws 2510 for the ladder truck replacement, 2511 for snow management facility, and 2512 for water treatment plant 1 chlorine gas upgrade.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Looking to council to see if there are any questions. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. While the staff report does mention an interest rate,
Yep.
the interest rate will be at the time of the debenture.
At the time of the debenture.
So
Could be
any
a year from now, 2
yeah.
years from now. Yeah.
So whatever rate the interest set or preferred rate that the province provides.
It would prevent province loan, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Ern. This question might not be for you, but procurement of the ladder truck, likely coming out of the US, but there are some options for Canadian procurement on this one, potentially?
Mr. Mackay.
I'm aware of at least one company that produces fire trucks that's based in Canada. We'll need to see who responds to the RFP and who's able to meet our requirements. I'd say there's also items in your purchasing policy that a Canadian supplier might be better positioned to deliver on: ongoing customer service, lifetime cost of the asset, maintenance, etc. But we'll need to see what comes back from the procurement process.
And then, should there be some tariffs, are we still within budget, or do we know that at this point in time?
It's difficult to know how any tariffs will impact the final cost of the truck. We did our best to come up with a reliable budget estimate, but the world has continued to change since then.
Should it be significantly over budget, that comes back to council and would get reconsideration at that point in time?
Yes, yeah, it would come back to council if it's significantly over budget, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Well, unless within our procurement or within our bylaws, there's some room for movement going from one capital project to another. If it's over budget and there isn't that space elsewhere, it comes back to budget.
That's right, it would need to be significant. That's where the significance.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
is taken into account.
Thank you. Looking to see if there are any other questions. Thank you, Councillor Graham, for asking that question, because I had the same question. Councillor Graham, you have another question.
One more. Mr. Irwin, if you could go back to your graph with the, and just confirming the 2029 big jump there is the water treatment plant?
The start of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Wastewater.
Treatment plant, thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right. Seeing no more questions, I will then move, right in front of me here. I'll move the council gives second reading to borrowing bylaw 2025-10 for ladder truck replacement. Anyone wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll move the council give third reading to borrowing bylaw 2025-10 for ladder truck replacement. Anyone wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll move that council give second reading to Borrowing Bylaw 2025-11 for snow management facility. Anyone wish to speak to this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll move the council give third reading to Borrowing Bylaw 2025-11 for snow management facility. Anyone wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will move that council, that was third reading for this snow management, correct, that I did? Okay. My eyes moved. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so now I'll move that council gives second reading for Borrowing Bylaw 2025-12 for the the water treatment plant 1 chlorine gas upgrade. Anyone wishing to speak to that question or that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And I'll move that council give third reading to Borrowing Bylaw 2025-12 for WTP 1 chlorine gas upgrade. Anyone wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so now we will move to item G4, Procedural Bylaw Amendment and Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment, Conflict of Interest. Ms. Hyde, welcome to council, and whenever you're ready, the microphone is yours.
Sorry, thought I was all ready. My mouse isn't working. Sorry, now my mouse isn't working. Then I might need to get you to show this for me too. Oh, here's my mouse. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Sorry about that. And good morning, Mayor and Council. So the reason for my presentation today and the recommendations for amendments to a couple of bylaws are really to give Council an opportunity to review and discuss some changes that were recently made to the MGA at the end of October of last year around new provisions for conflict of interest. So I just wanted to set the stage a little bit by just talking about pecuniary interest briefly. So pecuniary interest is a specific type of conflict of interest that's been addressed in the MGA since I think there's been an MGA. So pecuniary interest is objective. In the MGA, there's quite a lot of sections that address what is a conflict of interest or a pecuniary interest, what is not a pecuniary interest. And a councillor either has one or doesn't. There's no gray area as far as the MGA is concerned. And if a councillor does have a pecuniary interest, that legislation is also very clear what needs to happen. You don't have a choice. So if you have a pecuniary interest, you have to follow the legislation and not participate in the discussion and debate of a matter. So the new provisions that came into effect at the end of October of last year address conflicts of interest that are not pecuniary. So they talk about private interest rather than pecuniary. So it's a different thing. And private interest is quite broadly defined in the MGA now, and it's really defined by what it isn't. So it really just isn't matters that are general in nature or that affect a counselor as part of a much larger group of the population. And also one specific part is you're not in a conflict of interest when you're discussing council remuneration. So that's one piece that they were specific about. Otherwise, it's subjective rather than being objective. So you don't have, in the same way that you have or don't have a pecuniary interest, with the conflict of interest is whether you believe you have one or believe that you don't. So it really rests on individuals, counselors' interpretation of their circumstances. And it's further more subjective that even if you do feel that there is a conflict or a perceived conflict, I'm sorry, I should say that as well because it applies to perceived conflicts as well as conflicts, you have a choice of what action you might want to take. It's not prescriptive like it is for pecuniary interest. So there's a big difference between pecuniary interest and now just this general conflict of interest idea. And the consequences of failing to follow legislation are quite different as well. So pecuniary interest can get quite serious. If you're in contravention of pecuniary interest legislation, it can ramp right up to being disqualified from council. So there's fairly serious consequences. The MGA appears to take this quite seriously, whereas conflict of interest, it's a lot more permissive. So the MGA doesn't set out sanctions and consequences for councillors who are wishing to disclose a conflict of interest. So again, much more subjective. You know, we think that probably the idea behind these new provisions is to give councillors more comfort. There's less risk in believing that you hold a conflict of interest or believing that there's a perceived conflict of interest and actually bringing that up in a public forum. There's less risk to you. So I think it's meant to bring matters in the public to be discussed without fear of reprisal, really is how I would read it. So that brings us to the proposed amendments. So the first proposed amendment is to the procedural bylaw. And as I mentioned in the staff report, and as you know, this came out of a workshop that we held with council a couple of months ago just to get more information about what these new provisions meant and how they would apply to council. So this is our attempt to interpret the discussions that happened at the workshop and bring back something for council to discuss as a proposed amendment to the procedural bylaw. So the idea behind the amendments is that if a councillor is going to choose to disclose a conflict or a perceived conflict, that you would give some evidence behind that. And it is in alignment with what's set out in the MGA. So you would have to follow these steps, right? You would have to identify whether it's you or a member of your family. You would have to disclose the general nature of the conflict, and you would need to indicate whether you had looked at the exceptions that are set out in the MGA. So that's part one. Part two is an opportunity for another councillor to question your disclosure, basically. And based on two different, I think, goals is what I understood from the workshop. Like one of the reasons is maybe a councillor is disclosing a conflict and their belief is not informed by all the evidence that maybe someone thinks that they should have considered. So they're bringing forward additional evidence. Another one would be if another councillor actually just doesn't believe the same thing the disclosing councillor believes. So an opportunity to dissent and have a discussion in public. So the idea would be, with the amendment, that any other councillor could make a motion, and if that was supported by a majority, people could speak to the motion, and if it passes, there would be a motion in the minutes asking the disclosing councillor to reconsider their decision. One thing I need to be clear on, though, is that councillor would not be obligated to reconsider their decision. You still follow the MGA, where if you believe you have a conflict or a perceived conflict, you still have to disclose it regardless of maybe your colleagues disagree with you. So you would still follow the MGA. You're not obliged to reconsider, even if there was a motion that asked you to do so. Does that make sense? We did put forward an alternative in the staff report, And that would be to not have a motion. Basically have the same kind of process, but not pass a motion. So it wouldn't be recorded in the minutes would be the big thing. And I think one of the things I heard at the workshop was it would be nice to have a record, whether or not there was some dissent with the rest of with the majority of the rest of council. If we went down the alternative route, there wouldn't be a record, right? It would just be a Q&A that would happen during council debate on a motion is how I would envision that playing out. And then this is sort of a companion piece. So the first piece is all about if a councillor discloses and there's disagreement. This part is if a councillor has not disclosed and there's someone else on council who thinks maybe you should be disclosing something. I actually perceive you to have a conflict of interest and I'd like to talk about that. So it's the same kind of process. This would be more of a motion arising. I think during a debate it would come up to ask a councillor to consider disclosing a conflict where they hadn't already. And it'd be the same kind of thing. If there was a motion, it would be recorded in the minutes, and the councillor still would not be obliged to disclose a conflict if they still didn't believe they had one after the debate on the motion, if that makes sense. And then the alternative is the same kind of thing, is to address it during debate and not have a motion. That wouldn't be recorded in the minutes.
Ms. Hyde, are you happy to take a question now?
Sure.
Or would you rather wait till the end?
Yeah, go.
Okay, Councillor Hillstead, you have a question?
Thank you for the presentation. With the alternatives, like we're saying that they wouldn't be recorded in the minutes, but it will be recorded if someone has a perceived conflict of interest in the minutes, right? So technically, if someone puts in the thing forward saying, you know, I have a perceived conflict of interest, that would go into the minutes, and then if through the question and debate they've decided, oh, I'm actually going to pull that out, that would also be recorded. So it wouldn't be, or how would that work then?
I don't think so. That's not how I would see it. I mean, you have the option of whatever you'd like to put in the procedural bylaw, right? But I wouldn't see that. Like, I would see that as much more casual. Same like a withdrawn motion almost, right? Like, if you make a motion and then in the discussion that happens, you realize that that motion maybe was out of order, you can withdraw it and that doesn't get recorded in the minutes. I see it as kind of the same thing, more of a casual conversation than if you were swayed and said, oh gosh, yeah, I actually do see that I have a perceived conflict, then you would state that and put it into the minutes.
Okay. So in some situations, because if you didn't think you had one, but then you decide you did, that would go into the minutes, but the reverse, if you put one out there and then decided against it, you could withdraw it. So in some cases, it would end up in the minutes, in some cases it wouldn't, just because that.
If you end up disclosing a conflict or perceived conflict, that goes in the minutes, and the MGA says that, so,
So, but so in the one case, it would get recorded essentially, because if you didn't think you had one, but then the discussion was, oh no, you do, and then you're like, you know what, I do, that gets disclosed, but the reverse of, if you put one forward and then get convinced otherwise, you might be like, oh yeah, no, I'm gonna withdraw that, so.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify that, thanks.
But it wouldn't be recorded that it was a result of the discussion.
No.
It would just be,
correct.
if you disclose a conflict, however you got there, either on your own or through discussion, it just gets recorded as a conflict.
That's how I see it too.
Councillor Faubert, you also have a question at this point?
Yes. It's my understanding that the direction of the MGA is that a councillor may disclose a potential conflict. So if it's a may, how would they fail to disclose?
The way I see it is the perceived conflict of interest piece.
Okay.
So when the perceived conflict of interest, the way I interpret that is you think someone else thinks you have a conflict, right? I don't think I have one, but you've already talked to me, you're a member of the public, and oh, you think I have one, so I'd like to address that.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how I read that one.
Awesome. And then when someone, I just want to make sure I understood some of the questions that Councillor Hillstead had asked. So in the minutes, when someone says, I have a pecuniary conflict of interest and I'm going to excuse myself from this discussion and leave, what does that look like in the minutes?
So you're talking about pecuniary?
Yeah, pecuniary.
Okay, that's not the subject here. If somebody declares a pecuniary is just there and they're out.
It's not recorded in the minutes?
Yes,
It
we
is.
record it, yeah.
It is. Yep.
Is there a special, the reason I'm asking is because I want to understand how a conflict of interest could be recorded in the minutes. So I'd like to understand how a pecuniary conflict is in the minutes. And is it under the item and before the vote?
Correct.
And it just says declared, and
They would say a counselor declared a pecuniary interest because they are the owner of the company that is the subject of the decision and left the meeting at X time. That's what we record now.
and then do you think fundamentally this is, really goes to trying to protect ourselves and our decisions from being thought of as biased?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Yeah, it's hard to know, like, we did, the intent behind the changes it's not published.
But yes.
But yes, I think it is a way to address sort of the same kind of, and I know Mr. Driedzik is here too and could probably jump in, but I think it is a way, because you're all familiar, like on the quasi-judicial boards, there is that sort of apprehension of bias that would excuse you from hearing a certain matter. That doesn't exist at a council level. There's not that bias piece, so I think this is a way for councillors to, and especially the perceived part I find quite interesting. So you may not think you have one, but you're aware that many members of the public think you have one, and you want to talk about it in public.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
That's all right. I think I'm almost finished. Oh yes, that was all I had on the procedural bylaw piece. And then the council code of conduct amendment is really just to amend the 3 sections that were in there before that talked about conflict of interest, because in the absence of there being conflict of interest provisions, this council addressed it in your code of conduct bylaw to say, and then the piece about pecuniary interest was in there just to set the, just to provide more context, right? So the pecuniary interest piece never needed to be in the conflict of interest bylaw or code of conduct bylaw anyway, because it's addressed in the MGA, but it provided context for those 2 sections that were in there to talk about what would happen if a counselor had a conflict. So they're all rendered obsolete by the changes to the MGA. So the recommendation is just that they get removed. And then those are the proposed motions, all the readings. And that is the end of my presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Looking to see if there are any other questions. All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so dealing first with the procedural bylaw amendments, I'll move that council give first reading to procedural bylaw amendment 2025-16, conflict of interest. Councillor Hillstad.
I'm happy to support this procedural bylaw amendment. I was open to going with the alternative or sticking with what we go with the current bylaw. To me, this is just gonna play out as it plays out, and maybe in the future term, they might change how this goes, just once you actually get it going and see how it actually plays out during council meetings, it may determine which way, if the alternative is better or if the way that we currently have it works best. So to me, there's gonna be some trial and error on this one because it is new, and it's kind of it's just an interesting bylaw to begin with these changes, just because, again, now you're opening it up to any potential type of conflict. So just how this all plays out going forward is going to be interesting to see. And so right now I'm comfortable with how we currently have it, but I'm also aware that we may need changes in the future. But again, I think it's one of those situations where we just kind of need to see how it rolls out and how it functions and see if it works. So happy to support.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Faubert, did you want to be bringing an amending motion?
I did, and I didn't hit my button fast enough, but I did send it to the clerks, and it is the alternative. And I'm in support of the changes. I would like to have the alternative. I don't think a motion of council is needed in order to have a discussion with our our own colleagues here up at the council table during a discussion around a conflict of interest. I think Councillor Hillstad's absolutely right. This is going to come down to us actually doing it a few times to understand how it works, how it feels, how it flows, and what is the most appropriate way to create that space to have conversations around conflict and perceived conflict, which I think is also a really important thing to be able to address appropriately. Because I've seen circumstances in the past when a perceived conflict has been weaponized against people in the public. And so I think the ability to actually address these things is really really useful and really effective and really helps in terms of civics and understanding in our community what it actually means to have a conflict of interest, and that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a conversation because we all have them. We all have them. And so here is the alternative. And it changes just the emotion, pass a motion to reconsider is the change. And I look forward to the discussion with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm somewhat torn with regards to the alternative, because during the workshop I was actually one advocating for, I'd like to have it noted in the minutes. I think that there's costs and benefits of going both ways. First of all, I think this overall change doesn't change what's going to be the discussion in the community of whether they think somebody has a conflict of interest or not. If it's declared, certainly it could be confirmed, but if it's not declared, because you do not have to declare it, you're still going to have that conversation. The conversation at the table, while may be interesting and brings it to the table, which is probably one of the only benefits from it, because it's still optional and subjective, I think that there's more opportunities for this rule to be abused than used well. And by abused, I mean taking opportunities to get out of voting when it may be very weak, the level of conflict that you have, or potential bias. Especially in a small community, there's always a great opportunity that you know the people in front of you, that you have some relation to the topic at hand, and it will be very easy through using these rules to get out of a vote, and that undermines civic governance. So I'm not really happy with the overall rule. As far as this amendment goes, the question is, how strongly do I want it noted in the minutes versus starting with the discussion? I'm happy to support the amendment. Let's start with the discussion. As Councillor Hillstead had mentioned, it could always be tweaked. And you know what? There still could be room. If somebody wanted a motion to be made, they could make a motion and have that in the minutes. It would just matter of how that's characterized, and it's not as easy as if it was set out. So I'm happy to start here, noting that it may go another place after we see how the whole process pans out. And I hope it's a non-issue, but here we are having to change the way we're doing things for something that is not even binding. Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you. I'm happy to support the amending motion. I was tinkering with that idea as well, which is why I said what I said, just of, I can go either way with this one. Again, this is a starting point. We're going to see how this works in action. To me, this is, I'm happy with this starting point because, again, I think the other one, again, any of these things could be weaponized. I hope that doesn't happen with our council or future councils. But again, I'm happy to start here, and if things need to be adjusted, they get adjusted. And this to me is the lighter version. So almost the easier way to start, just because it makes it a little easier in some respects, where the other one feels a little more rigid. So I'm happy to support this amending motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak to the amending motion? Councillor Faubert, did you have anything you wanted to add in closing?
I think that there are other consequences. Should there be a person who in the future tries to avoid fulfilling their role as an elected official and making decisions for the community through a mechanism like this. I think that those consequences exist outside of this room, and they're very real. And I think that that's where I see that playing out, not as a motion. So that's why I went with this one. And I also think too that it's really important for me, just individually, given the complexity of this, given the workshop, if I ever found myself in a situation where I felt that I needed to, at this table, speak to a conflict of interest, I would be having conversations before I reached this table in a public meeting to make sure that what I'm doing is appropriate. So I think that, let's trust in people to do their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Returning to the original motion then, as amended, as we're at first reading. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? I will support this motion despite my concerns that I raised in speaking to the amending motion. It is what it is. We have to deal with this because it's now part of the Municipal Government Act. And I certainly hope that it will not be abused, and I trust that most people will not. However, it's for those that may want to get out of a difficult vote that I'm concerned about. That said, I'll support it. Anyone else wishing to speak? Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, this is one of those ones that you kind of have to support, even if you disagree with the potential outcomes of what this might mean. So, for all the reasons you stated, I'll support it. But I don't see this one playing out well at moments in time, unfortunately.
Okay. Councillor, anyone else wishing to speak to the first reading? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move that council give second reading to Procedural Bylaw Amendment 2025-16, conflict of interest. Anyone wishing to speak to that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll move that council give leave to go to third reading of Procedural Bylaw Amendment 2025-16, conflict of interest. Councillor Graham, you'd like to speak to that motion?
I would. I'm just looking to my colleagues. There are 5 of us at the dais here today. We're missing 2. We absolutely have quorum. But I wonder if there's any consideration for the other 2 missing members and delaying this until their return.
I don't see it necessary to delay, but are you putting a motion on the table?
I was just looking for the discussion more than anything else at this point in time.
Okay, does anybody want to speak to that concern? Councillor Faubert?
I don't think that we need to delay. Our colleagues were present at the workshop, and there's 5 of us here today. Putting this onto another agenda could bump other things in the future from those agendas, and our time is precious, and we have it here now, and I think we should move forward.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I know that the May 6th agenda is chock-a-block full. Okay, Councillor Graham?
Thanks. I appreciate those perspectives and just wanted to make sure that we had a quick chat about that one.
Okay, thanks for raising your concern. All right, anyone else wishing to speak before I call the question? Okay, so I'm calling the question on the leave to go to third reading. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now I move that council give third reading to Procedural Bylaw Amendment 2025-16, Conflict of Interest. Anyone wishing to speak to that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now I'll move that council give first reading to Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment 2025-17, Conflict of Interest. And Councillor Hillstad, you have an amending motion.
Yes, thank you. As we're going to be removing all of the subjects that talk about conflict of interest, I thought it'd be prudent to change the title of the section from conflicts of interest to gifts and gratuities, because that's all that's left to be talked about in that section. So just a little cleanup just to make sure that the section is labeled correctly.
I will definitely support that. It's very good catch, and makes for a better document. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor Ma.
I'm happy to support there, Councillor Hillstad. You finding that is a gift, and I am grateful.
I love the pun.
Okay. All right, then, I will call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay, so we're returning to the first reading then of the Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment as amended. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll move the council give second reading to Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment 2025-17, Conflict of Interest. Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will now move the council give leave to go to third reading of Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment 2025-17, Conflict of Interest. Anybody wish to speak to that motion? Call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll move the council give third reading to Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment 2025-17, Conflict of Interest. Anyone wishing to speak to that motion? So now I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Great. Okay, so now we can move on to a couple of items of new business. H1, Repeal Vehicle Replacement Policy PW-002. Mr. Mackay.
Mayor Crowsert, our presenter for that topic has hit a snag on their way down, so we're wondering if we might be able to switch the order of H1 and H2.
Sure.
Just to give them a couple extra minutes.
So I will move that we will deal with item H2 prior to H1 in order for the presenter to be able to make it to the chambers. Anyone wishing to speak to that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We will then move to H2, Repeal Three Sisters Resort Corps and Stewart Creek Municipal Reserves Policy PD-011. Mr. Schneider, welcome to council. And whenever you're ready, the microphone is yours.
Here we go. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. As council is aware, administration have been taking a look at the various policies that are on the books with council, and PD-011 is a policy that deals with municipal reserves within a couple of the areas within Three Sisters Mountain Village, namely the Resort Corps and the Stewart Creek area. At this point, development within the Three Sisters area has essentially made this policy redundant. Within the Stewart Creek area, the last major development component, which is the Gateway mixed-use commercial residential subdivision, has gone through subdivision approval, and municipal reserve lands have been dedicated. And now with the implementation of the Three Sisters Village area structure plan that basically takes care of how municipal reserves are going to be dealt with through the old former resort area. So just very quickly, TSMV is aware that, that we're proposing that this policy be repealed. And our recommendation, again, is that, that policy PD-011 be repealed at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schneider. Looking to council to see if there are any questions. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will then move that council repeal Three Sisters Resort Corps and Stewart Creek Municipal Reserves Policy PD-011. Just to put this in context, on a regular basis, council, along with administration, reviews all of town's policies, and hopefully at least once per term. And in doing so, we identify some that stand, are still relevant, continue. We see some that require some amendments or updates, and we see some that are no longer relevant or redundant, as Mr. Schneider mentioned. And so we have identified through a workshop process those policies that will come back to us either for removal or removal and replacement with something else, or an update. And so this is the first, these two new business items are the first tranche of these coming with respect to the large number of policies that we've recently reviewed in a workshop format. So I will certainly support this motion and encourage others to do elsewhere, because this is part of the cleanup of our policies and making sure that we keep them current and relevant. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor Graham?
I see this as just a red tape reduction.
Well, the H1 is definitely a red tape reduction, and this too. If we can remove policies that get in the way, it also helps streamline things. But I do appreciate you also working to fill the time so that Mr. Heel can arrive for the next presentation. Without further ado, then, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Mr. Heel, don't rush. Don't rush. You're all good. Yeah. Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah. And so we will move to our last item, H1, but catch your breath, Mr. Heel. I understand that you were delayed on the way down, but whenever you're ready, the microphone is yours. Welcome.
There was a train. Not gonna lie.
Well, in your defense, according to the estimated agenda, we're about a half hour ahead.
Okay, and I saw my
Right.
timeline. It looks like we're gonna buy 5 minutes here, so.
Yeah, exactly, and this is the last item for the day.
Yeah.
And so we've saved some of the best for last.
All right, well.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm here to talk to you about a request to rescind the vehicle replacement policy. So the recommendation is that council rescind the vehicle replacement policy and replace it with a corporate directive to guide fleet asset planning, replacing and repurposing. So a little bit of background, the original intent of the policy was to formalize parameters for fleet asset decision-making. These included age, repair and maintenance costs, and then a mechanical assessment. So depending on the category the vehicle fell in, it was typically like 8 years. Then you take a look at the repair and maintenance cost, and we used 30% as a threshold to say if the repair and maintenance costs are 30% of the residual value or perceived residual value, we would then do a mechanical assessment and delay it by up to 1 year. But we would have to come to council for that, and it was like another year we would have to come to council. It's redundant. So there are limitations with the policy. It's not comprehensive, so many of the fleet assets are missing from the policy. So it doesn't currently include bikes. We have some boats, we have trailers. I mean, it addresses electric vehicles as the vehicle, but there's no mention of EVs per se throughout, and that would include the charging infrastructure. And it's a bit of a siloed approach, so it kind of looks at one department and then another department and just takes a look at that specific interest. And then it restricts timely and prudent business decisions without seeking council approval. So I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. Further, the policy challenges the ability to efficiently support implementation measures outlined by the Climate Emergency Action Plan without council approval. So right-sizing or sharing equipment. So an example would be a facilities truck that's underutilized might sit there for half the year when we could use it as a rental vehicle in the Parks Department and save $1,500 a year. You know, it's you know, say $6,000–7,000 in savings. It's small enough dollar values that I think those are agile business decisions that don't necessarily require council approval. Or another limitation relative to the Climate Emergency Action Plan would be delaying end of life. So if you remember the paid parking vehicle, you know, between Caitlin and I, she was going to rent a vehicle, and I was like, well, let's go to council. Or between us, we said, let's go to council, delay one of the cruises. They use it. It's a $14,000 savings, but there's a lot of people involved to make that kind of a decision. And then there are limitations with the ability to explore alternative solutions to doing business. So, you know, how can we use a bike instead of a car? Or can we, you know, that's kind of going on with the engineering department right now. They have a dedicated vehicle, and we're looking at the possibility of dedicating a bike and flipping that vehicle into the administrative fleet vehicle pool. So these I feel are business decisions that are capable within administration's capacity. The recommendation is to replace it with a corporate directive. So the title of the corporate directive is Fleet Asset Planning, Replacing and Repurposing. And what it does, it incorporates asset management best practices to guide fleet decisions. And those decision-making principles would achieve a whole organizational approach. Like, we just know our fleet better. We've got better telematics. We understand utilization. We've got a fleet coordinator and a better service management plan. So we're maintaining our equipment better today than we ever have, and we understand it better today than we ever have. Decision-making principles would also achieve safe and sustainable solutions. So, you know, working with Caitlin Van Gaal and Amy Fournier and having discussions around what, you know, opportunities and funding there might be available for electric vehicles. We look at optimal usage scenarios. So the telematics system can literally tell us hard data about how the vehicles are getting used and where it might make sense to put a heavily used vehicle, keep it for another couple of years, and move it into an area that might not be used quite as frequently. And then we also want to maintain equipment value retention. So we're not looking at driving these things right into the ground. We want to maintain that, but it's an assessment on a regular basis. It's to say, like, where are we at right now? You know, COVID, as an example, you know, if you would consider, like, take bikes, for example. Bikes are cheap right now, used bikes, so it might make sense to hold on to those until you can get an increased residual value, potentially at a later date. It just allows for more flexibility in that regard. So in conclusion, the recommendation is that council rescind the vehicle replacement policy and replace it with a corporate directive to guide fleet asset planning, replacing and repurposing. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Hill, and appreciate the presentation. Excellent justification to remove the policy and replace it with a corporate directive. And ultimately, council has ultimate control on whether there's something purchased or not, because we control the budget. And so there wouldn't be any purchase of any new vehicle under whatever guidelines unless it's approved in the budget.
Correct.
Right, thanks. And Councillor Faubert, you have a question.
Yes, I just had a question about the recommended motion in the report, which doesn't include replace it with a corporate directive to guide fleet asset planning. And I think it should just be that council rescind the vehicle replacement policy, because we don't do the corporate directive.
Yeah.
And I'll speak to it because
So just to that, I'll use the recommended motion that's in the agenda package.
This is where, like, my inner nerd comes out, because This is an evolution of how governance happens in our community, and the 2016 policy around the fleet I don't think it now serves us as an organization, because it is the how, right? And we should be focused as council in governance at a much higher level than that, which is why the asset management policy that we have from 2021 truly is the policy. And so then under that, something like the corporate directive now gives the ability for administration to set up the mechanisms, the systems, the approach, how they do it, so that there's so we get that value, so we manage our assets really well, we achieve our outcomes in climate change, right? And we're getting value, we're delivering services better, there's efficiencies. So I love all of this. Thank you.
To that point, like I spoke with Peter Kinsberg, the asset manager, about that a number of times, and it felt a little bumpy that we would have a policy just guiding, I mean, like if you consider other assets within the community, we don't have like it's guided under the asset management system as opposed to a specific policy, as I understand. And it just felt like it made sense, and with the directive was guided by asset management best practices through conversations with Peter. So it felt cleaner to do it that way.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. I'll move then that council repeal vehicle replacement policy PW-002. I've already essentially spoken to it in introducing it. Anybody else? Councillor Ma.
Yep. Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Mr. Heel, for bringing this forward. I think it's timely. I think it's smart. Keeps us agile. And, in current events, given with potential tariffs coming down, new vehicles being, thousands upon thousands of dollars more, if we can be a little more effective with what we got, that sounds great. So thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will now move that we adjourn. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you.